The Plympton Podcast.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Plympton Podcast, in which we have a look at the issue of garden waste collections here in the local area. The collection of garden waste in green sacks was due to commence at the beginning of April, but when the coronavirus lockdown was announced, the resumption of this service was suspended. As the weeks went by and garden waste started building up in people's gardens, they were becoming rather restless and getting in touch with our local councillors to query when collections would start again. Members of the Conservative group on the City Council tabled a motion to be debated at their meeting on the 22nd of June. The motion had three components to it. Firstly, they were calling for garden waste collections to start again from the 1st of July, for the collections to take place from residents' properties whether they had registered for the service or not, and also to extend the collections until the 30th of November. During the debate you're about to hear, the extension of the service until the 30th of November is frequently referred to as paragraph 3. The council meeting was due to start at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On the morning of the meeting, the portfolio holder responsible for waste services here in Plymouth, Councillor Sue Dan, announced that the authority would have a target date of resuming garden waste collections of the 24th of August. Nonetheless, the debate for an earlier start to the service on the 1st of July went ahead. It was proposed by the Moorview councillor, Maddie Bridgman, who set out why she'd brought the motion.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. So here I am again, another motion on notice on garden waste. Yes, the world has experienced one of the worst pandemics in many years. Yes, we have seen our staff self-isolating, protecting themselves and their families from this horrendous virus, and rightly so. PCC have not furloughed their staff. At one stage, street services were down to just 60% of their workforce, and that 60% priority had to be general waste collection. And that 60% have been marvellous. They did not have the option of working from home. They've worked hard and continue to provide this essential service, and I clap for them too on our Thursday nights. I have stated over and over again that safeguarding our staff and our workforce has to be our highest priority, and it has been. But now we are back, following a lockdown of many months. Slowly we are allowed to venture out, released from our bubbles of isolation. Many of our staff have returned to work, and we are now at almost 80%. As Conservatives, we wanted garden waste collections resumed, and following a focused campaign, Chelsham Meadow has been reopened. Reluctantly by our opposition, but at least reopened. And I have to say that staff there have been magnificent. And if you're lucky enough to own a suitable vehicle, if you are lucky enough to drive, because you can't take rotting bags of garden waste on public transport, you can visit Chelsham Meadow and dispose of your garden waste. But what about the residents who require assisted collections? What about those in self-isolation? What about the people that cannot drive and do not have access to a suitable vehicle? And I say suitable because people who own camper vans have been turned away from Chelsham Meadow despite queuing for hours. In some areas, we've seen uncollected garden waste rotting on our pavements for months and months, attracting flies and rats. And yes, I've received emails regarding rats. We are hearing one excuse after another. One excuse is the council couldn't use subcontractors to help with garden waste because we use bags rather than wheeling bins. I hope the costing for wheelie bins for garden waste has progressed further. One of Labour's pledges was to increase recycling rates, and yet, according to the Cabinet report on the 9th of June, Street Scene and Waste has not received an increase in their budget. In recent years, there has been an increase of 3,000 properties in Plymouth. That's an additional 156,000 household collections per year, but no equivalent increase in their net budget. If you don't give Councillor Sue Dan the money, she can't provide the service. I'm sure our much-loved incinerator is enjoying the sneaky bags of garden waste that's being disposed of in our brown bins out of utter desperation by our residents. We've seen an increase in fly tipping figures from just last week that show it's up by 50%. Yes, weekly emails, telephone calls, Facebook comments about this. It's counterproductive. Residents are saying they pay their council tax, but with no garden waste collections, they are asking for a rebate. Complaints are being received from residents who have taken the time to register, and yet they have done so and their waste has not yet been collected. They are asking if our Labour-led council has an ulterior motive and if they're going to start charging for our garden waste collection. Whilst garden waste has not been deemed an essential service, it has been budgeted within our council tax. Where has this money been spent? It's been spent elsewhere. The LGA reported only 8% of councils are not collecting garden waste. 92% of councils are. Those councils listened to government guidance and yet they still provided the service. In Plymouth, this was deemed as non-essential, but now staffing levels have increased, there's no excuse. Other councils have managed, Plymouth hasn't. You could have started by doing monthly collections. There's always another option. Plymouth is being neglected again, left behind. You need to start garden waste collections now in Plymouth, not on the 24th of August. That's 2 months away. Our Labour-led council are not getting the basics right. And if you do break under pressure and decide to support this motion, crews must be told to pick up unregistered bags. We've seen in recent years our seasons are changing. Our spring flowers are appearing earlier and summer flowers are lasting for longer. The grass is growing well into autumn, and the leaves, what are left on our trees in Plymouth, are staying greener for longer. Therefore, it is sensible to extend our collection period until the end of November. This would also increase our recycling rates, so it'd be win-win. Please support this motion today. Please, please support our residents. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Councillor Bridgman's motion on garden waste had been seconded by her party colleague, the Perivale Ward Councillor Tony Carson.
My Lord Mayor, when Councillor Bridgman, the Shadow Cabinet member for this portfolio, asked if I would second this motion, I was initially concerned that I would be contradicting my views on how the waste team had been operating during the pandemic. From the operating team, who have never stopped work, all the way up to Councillor Sudan, I have been praising the response of the team who have delivered the service in a professional way. On a personal note, I've been working from home during the full lockdown, and the sound of the bin lorries clattering along the road once a week was a welcome relief to the eerie silence that coronavirus brought. It felt like there was a normality to the world hearing those wagons. I fully appreciate that we needed to focus on the brown and green bin collections, and this has been done very well. Garden waste seems to be a low priority for the council, and the government have cut us a lot of slack on this. Now, however, with 92% of councils nationally collecting garden waste, and with this council a leading light in terms of local authority management, it's time that we set an example and got on with it. We have a good reputation amongst our peers, but there is a limit to what they will put up with. We cannot go on allowing our waste to be fly tipped on Dartmoor or in the leafy South Hams. It has to stop. Councillor Dan has received no increase in budget, yet is expected to provide the same level of service with an additional 3,000 homes. An impossible task for any portfolio holder. Her department are working with their hands tied behind their backs. Councillor Bridgman and I put the green waste issue out for comment to our residents, and it has reached over 10,000 people. This shows the depth of feeling among the residents that want the green waste service resumed. We are not all lucky enough to have the right kind of transport to drop the waste at Chelston Meadow. Councillor Lowry was the only councillor to comment on the Facebook postings, and we will not go into that detail here, but I will say it would appear most of the residents who commented feel it is a financial issue. Health and safety is the first priority for any organisation, and similar to industry, investment to manage coronavirus has to be made. There are far more experienced members and officers than I who can work up a solution, and it will require investment. So far, Plymouth has been given £15 million by the government to manage the coronavirus crisis, which is £56 per person, compared to Barrow-in-Furness, who received just £10 per person. So we know we are good at bidding for funding if we need it. Let's get on with it and have the green waste running. Residents have been told they can deliver the green waste to the tip, but unfortunately, if you live in the west side of the city, you have to drive to Chelston Meadow as Weston Mill is still shut. I am sure with robust planning, this site could be reopened safely. Apart from that, it does not sit well that we are asking residents to burn extra fossil fuel on tip runs. I want to express my personal concerns for our staff who are shielding and cannot return to work. It's no holiday and no fun when you want the interaction with your work colleagues and are not allowed to go to work yet. The solution to our reduced capacity must lie with help from the commercial waste operators in the short term. The longer this non-collection of green waste is allowed to continue, the worse it is getting. There must literally be tons of decomposing waste in the gardens across Plymouth, getting worse every day. The proposed start date of the 24th of August is a long 9 weeks away. Can we ask for the delivery plan to be published for this date, please, Councillor Dan? I hope members will support Councillor Bridgman so we can all respond to residents with more positive news to say the collection service will start sooner rather than have to wait another 9 weeks, and that it will be extended to take into account the warmer autumns that we are now experiencing. Thank you, my Lord Mayor.
Following the hearing of the opening arguments, a rather exasperated portfolio holder for Waste Services, Councillor Sue Dan, set out her position.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm going to have to vote against this motion. You are aware now that I've already announced that garden waste will resume in August. Ever since the start of this current COVID-19 situation, the Council has always made sure that we follow guidance to make sure that our staff and residents are safe, and that the Council has had to prioritise domestic waste collection with our reduced staffing levels that Councillor Bridgman talked about. If we resume the garden waste service right now with current guidelines from DEFRA, the Health and Safety Executive and Government on July the 1st, it would put our staff at risk because it would be impossible to introduce the service without proper working processes in place. And we still have a minimum numbers of drivers at work to cover our domestic waste collections because we have drivers who are at home and shielding. Every single week we review all our services and we bring back things when we can. For instance, the phased, successful, well-planned opening of Chelsea Meadow has been really appreciated by many of our residents. I noticed today that we've had an upturn in demand again, and that's because the recycling centre started taking wood. When we know we've got demand at a reasonable level, we will then start taking trailers and larger vans, but it just has to be managed. It has been successful. We've had lots of compliments, and so following this model, we're going to bring back garden waste collection in August, assuming that all the health and safety requirements can be met. We have to put our staff safety first. And it does seem to me that in this particular motion on notice that you are not doing it. We are not introducing garden waste because we don't have the money. We are not introducing garden waste because we don't have the staff. We do have an issue with drivers because they're shielding, but we have to make sure that we bring back the service and it is safe to do so. Just to put a few things out there though, it is not that we don't think that garden waste is a priority. You're absolutely wrong. The government does. The government thinks it's a low priority. We actually think that garden waste is a really valued service. And I know our residents have really missed it. And I've had emails and I have responded with the truth. And you know what? All I've had is thank you, Councillor Dan, for letting us know why we can't have our garden waste back now. It's not a service that every resident uses. We've got 30,000 people have registered. We've got a lot more residents across the city who don't use it. And just to put this into perspective, it is a non-statutory service, which means that it is not paid for by our council tax. One of the reasons that other authorities are operating could be because they collect the garden waste with food waste, which is of a much higher priority and we have to collect it, or they charge for the service, or they use wheelie bins. Every authority is different. We have looked at outsourcing our garden waste for the rest of the year, but because we don't use wheelie bins, because we use bags, commercial people are not interested. We value the service. Residents value the service. We will be collecting garden waste for residents as soon as we can in August, whether they're registered or not. But we will continue to encourage people to register, and the registration process will open again on July the 1st because it will help us with our rounds, and it means that we can make sure that we use the less rounds and the less fuel. Now, going back to this now, for the entire period of COVID-19, we have prioritised the collection of domestic bins. We have had to. We have staff who are shielding. Some of them have had to isolate. So in order to keep going, we've had to redeploy other staff to support the service. The refuse collection service, as you've said, has been under an enormous amount of pressure. They are frontline workers, but they have done an absolutely fantastic job. Our refuse collectors have received so many thanks, and they have really been appreciated by people right across. This service, though, still has people shielding. We have drivers shielding, and this puts a lot of pressure on those who are still working to maintain the priority of domestic waste collection. You can imagine our drivers are highly skilled and they have to manage really tight reversing in the narrow streets they have to work in. It is a very skilled job and not one that you can get lots of other drivers in to do that work. So that's where we are now. We will introduce it when it is safe to do so. As long as we can collect our domestic waste and operate safely, we will look at continuing the service into November. We don't know what's going to happen. We may have a second spike. We may have a shortage of drivers. And if so, different guidelines will again be followed, but we'll always have to prioritise our domestic waste. For these reasons, I am voting against this motion, as it is unsafe for our staff to start working and doing garden collections on July the 1st. And we will resume the service as planned safely in August. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
In an ancient stunnery town, with programmes just for you, the Plympton Podcast.
You're listening to a Plympton Podcast gardening waste collection special. Councillor Terry Beer explained to her council colleagues that she'd been inundated with complaints on the issue of garden waste.
Once again, waste remains an issue. Before the pandemic, the excuse was registering, now it's staffing. My inbox is full of complaints about garden waste not being collected, and once again the Labour administration is discriminating against those who are elderly, infirm or shielding at present. Lord Mayor, let's not also forget those with learning disabilities. Garden waste bags on our street and in our gateways and stored in gardens during this growing season, more and more waste is building up. Millie raised a good point by stating, why are they not collecting green bags now? The same reason they're not cutting grass? Joe said, what is the resistance to reinstate garden waste collections? It's an essential service to a majority of today's homes with gardens not large enough to store or compost weeks' worth of waste. All people are going to the tip with large majorities in cases to dispose of garden waste. It's ludicrous. They should be restarted immediately without having to register. I myself am shielding to protect my husband and I've been unable to travel to the tip due to the volume of people that I would come into contact with. COVID-19 would kill my husband if he contracted it, and as such it forbids me to do a tip run with the ever-increasing garden waste. This is, Lord Mayor, just a very small sample of the residents' own thinking, including my own. Firstly, discriminating for registering online, and now discriminating against those who are unable to do or don't have the ability to attend Chelsea Meadow. This is only seeking to build up a huge issue when the collections ever restart. Or is this administration choosing to put charges on future collections when it is reinstated? Lord Mayor, I will be supporting this motion this afternoon.
Councillor Jemima Lang wasn't initially intending to speak in the debate, but the comments of Councillor Terry Beer had somewhat incensed her.
I wasn't going to speak, actually, but since Councillor Beer brings her personal circumstances into it, I'm afraid I can't help myself. She describes how she has had to change her normal way of doing things to accommodate a shielding family member and to ensure their safety, which I applaud. But why is that okay for her, but described as an excuse when the council do the same? Council workers are no less important than someone close to you, Councillor Beer. They are as entitled to their safety as your husband, and I'm enormously reassured that at least the Labour-run council cares about that. This motion and the various Tory contributions just show me that the opposition members do not. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Pete Smith is the Deputy Leader of Plymouth City Council. He started off by indicating he'd been somewhat alarmed by postings on social media.
I want to start by saying how alarmed I am at reading the party opposite's comments on Facebook, saying that Councillor Bridgman and Carson are demanding the reintroduction of garden waste collection. May I say, Lord Mayor, they can demand all they like, but I will assure Council that the health, safety and welfare of our staff is our priority, and until we have a safe system of work in place, we cannot reintroduce it. We have followed government guidance on prioritising household waste and manage a good collection. But garden waste is low priority, and we have just not had the resources or a safe system of work in place. Lord Mayor, all our buildings and operations, we conduct full risk assessment based on latest government advice from DEFRA, Health and Safety Executive and Public Health England. We develop a safe system of work to manage risk. We produce and deliver regular toolbox talks so that staff are kept updated on the latest guidance. And Lord Mayor, it's worth noting that we have recently had a local health and safety executive review, and they have passed all our systems and processes as safe. Our waste collection process has been evaluated in this way using a variety of tried and tested processes, which include observation and consultation with our experienced operators, taking into account statutory requirements, the guidance for Public Health England, DEFRA and Health and Safety Executive. An example of this would be the use of the current COVID-19 related guidance from Public Health England that leads to control restricting the number of operatives in a vehicle cab, and DEFRA guidance that prioritise waste collection ranging from high priority for residential waste to low priority for garden waste. Once these controls are established, the work method is documented in the safe system of work that may also be referred to as a safe working operation procedure. This combines control measures and assessments for the task being undertaken. Currently, we have 9 HGV drivers off from collections and 1 HGV driver off from cleansing, totaling 10. We also have 3 specialist drivers off who operate the small mechanical sweepers on the cleansing side. There are a couple of staff who we use to operate the 7.5 vehicles, such as bulky waste collection, who are also off due to COVID. With respect to garden waste collections, we can only operate safely with a crew of 4, 1 driver and 3 loaders. This is due to the demands of handling heavy garden waste bags over an extended period and the stress that puts on the body and the risk of musculoskeletal injuries, which is part of a separate risk assessment. Therefore, given the current guidance, it is simply not safe to operate garden waste collections with 4 people in a single cab, particularly when DEFRA deem it low priority. The current COVID-19 situations means that our risk assessment and safe working systems of work are under constant review as advice from government changes, and we will continue to review garden waste. But at this time, Lord Mayor, I cannot support the motion. Thank you.
Well, across to Plymstock now, where one of the ward councillors there, Councillor Vivian Pengelly, explained that this issue of garden waste had been a significant issue among her electorate.
This decision is one that has affected my ward more than any other new decision the council has had to make during this difficult time. Several residents, especially elderly ones, who do not have the transport, find it really difficult to get rid of their garden waste to Chelston Meadow. They do not like to ask friends or neighbours to take it, as it usually is not clean. Compost bins are full and cannot be used for several months. So what do they do with all this garden waste? It is piling up in their back gardens or dries, it's rotting, it's attracting flies, rats, and it smells. And I'm not demanding now, I am pleading to say, look at paragraph 3, Councillor Dan. Could you please extend it until the 30th of November? That would help. For a lot of elderly people, those who live on their own or just together with another elderly person, gardening is the only pleasure they've had during this last 3-4 months. They haven't been able to get out, they can't go anywhere, they can't talk to their friends, they cannot mix socially. All they can do is their garden, which they love. But now, with all the garden waste piling up, it's becoming a real chore. So I plead with you, to support this motion, especially the third paragraph. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Pengelly's comments drew some support from the independent councillor for Drake, Chaz Singh.
Yeah, I just want to echo something that Councillor Pengelly has just said and highlighted. It's about extending the collection date. Now, I understand Councillor Sudan, portfolio holder for the environment, has said, obviously, until the numbers of staff have increased, that will be taken into consideration. It's almost as if a decision has been made that we know, or the party, the administration, knows that we aren't going to get the number of staff ready. Now, I don't know if that's a Mystic Meg prediction or whether or not it's something that could be taken into consideration, given the fact that we've been talking about the issue that we are living in unprecedented times, and the issue around making sure that as a city, this council ensures to support those people who are vulnerable, shielded, isolated, living on their own. There are people I know, and in the Drake ward, I've had an increase of people who've been tipping. There's been furniture, clothing, all sorts of rubbish. And I'm pretty sure that Councillor Dan is aware of the number of emails that I've sent out, the pictures, the information that I put out to say to residents, this is where we are and this is the situation we're in. I would also suggest that actually paragraph 3 is an absolute critical point where you can turn around and say, if the number of staff were to increase, let's just say were to increase, because we can't have a prediction to say that there will be no staff increase. But if there was an increase in staff, those who are fit to return to work, those who have come away from being shielded, those who have come away from being isolated, and the vehicles are there because they were already in place, given that before COVID, grass collections were being collected anyway. So it's not like the council has run out of vehicles all of a sudden. But could they then take into consideration that the date that's highlighted there, the 30th of November, I'm pretty sure that residents in Drake and probably across the city, including Plymouth in the ward of Councillor Pengelly, and the ones that Councillor Bridgman talks about, I think that needs to be taken into consideration. But I'd be happy to support this motion where the extension of the collection period can be increased to 30th of November, given the circumstances, especially around staffing levels and staff vehicles and the number of staff that are legally and duty bound by DEFRA and all the other regulation that have kicked into place because of COVID. And it'd be interesting to see that Councillor Bridgman talks about 92% of the councils across the country have come back and reintroduced the collections. I'd be quite interested in seeing the 92% that have done that. And if we can, the 30th of November is an ideal date to say that actually as a city, we're looking after the people who live in this city and have that service given to them, to say that, yes, we want people who have been left alone. And as Councillor Pengelly says, the garden is their only refuge, given that they can't go outside. I'm pretty sure that people who've gone into the garden, their mental health has increased or decreased given the pressures that people have. So I'm going to support this motion. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Labour councillor Kevin Neal represents those living in the Stoke area. As well as being concerned for the safety of council employees, he was somewhat bemused as to why there'd not been a greater take-up of garden composting.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Again, I made a decision coming to this late in the day. I'll be clear, first of all, that I'll be voting against this. Secondly, I would just like to thank and commend Councillor Dan and all of the staff right through to every last frontline staff member for the work they've done during this crisis. They've very much kept the city going. They've dealt with everything that was absolutely essential. And in return for that, as an absolute minimum, those staff deserve to know that every member of this council puts their safety above everything else. And I most certainly put their safety above any of my needs and any other non-essential need. Now, I'm well aware that a lot of people have gardens. Stoke Ward is no exception. In fact, there's an awful lot of people in Stoke Ward with gardens of varying sizes. Surely, am I because I haven't heard this word mentioned yet in this debate, am I the only person who thinks that composting is a good idea? People with large gardens always tend to compost, and people with small gardens tend to as well, and have a lesser requirement. Now, I'm not to decry the benefit of the garden refuse collection service. It's well used, it's popular, and clearly there is a need for it. But there is another way, and in a crisis like this, as a exchange between, do we encourage people to do more composting on the one hand, or put staff at risk on the other hand, then for there to be any hesitation about the right answer to that question would be absolutely laughable. So, as I've said, absolutely against this motion, absolutely supportive of what Councillor Dan and the staff have achieved. And again, I just thank you for that. It's amazing that things turned around in this city as quickly as they have done. We can only hope that a second spike doesn't come along that thwarts everyone's best efforts. And I'm sure, having heard some of the contributions at the start of the meeting, we know that we're in good hands. But there we are. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, those who had spoken in the debate having done so, it then fell to Councillor Bridgman to sum up before the motion was put to the vote.
Thank you, my Lord Mayor. I'm speechless. I'm absolutely, I'm disappointed that our opposition didn't even listen to my speech. They just quoted figures back at me. I reiterate, 92% of other councils are doing this across the country. Councillor Dan is supposed to be a champion for climate change, and yet you are expecting more vehicles to travel right across the city and queue to use the recycling centre. How is that good for the environment? You chose to open Chelsea Meadow, but what about the other side of the city? A Labour-controlled area. Mostly your Labour voters come from that side of the city, and you haven't opened Western Mill Recycling Centre. You've had long enough in post to change the bags to wheelie bins. There's been chaos in the registration scheme. I'm an advocate for supporting staff. I said that in my speech, and safeguarding them. You could have brought in agency and drivers and utilised the testing station. I went there yesterday. Hardly anyone's using it. In the grand scheme of things, garden waste is non-essential, but 12 weeks on, people have been out in their gardens and it's now becoming essential. In reply to Councillor Neil, composting is on the climate change agenda, but nothing's been done under Labour. It should have been rolled out. And as Councillor Kirsten said, 10,000 engagements on social media, 10,000 voters who want this back and back now. You're not listening again to your residents. You're not listening to us. And you haven't even agreed to extend the collection date. So I don't know what else to say. Thank you, my Lord Mayor, but thanks for nothing.
With the council meeting being held online in a virtual form rather than in the council chamber, a roll call was taken to determine how votes were to be cast.
Councillor Allen.
Against.
Councillor Aspinall.
Again.
Councillor Ball.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Beer.
4.
Councillor Ian Bowyer.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Bowyer.
4.
Councillor Mrs. Bridgman.
Obviously 4.
Councillor Buchan.
Against.
Making herself look stupid, isn't she? Nige?
Can I remind councillors to mute their microphones once they've voted? Thank you. Councillor Corbett.
Against.
Councillor Carson.
4.
Councillor Churcham.
4.
Councillor Coker.
Against.
Councillor Cook is absent. Councillor Dan.
Definitely against.
Councillor Darcy.
4.
Councillor Derrick.
Against.
Councillor Sam Davey.
Against.
Councillor Deacon.
4.
Councillor Downey.
4.
Councillor Dream. Councillor Evans, OBE.
Against.
Councillor Hayden.
Against.
Councillor Goslin.
Against.
Councillor Hendy.
Against.
Councillor James.
4.
Councillor Jordan.
4.
Councillor Johnson.
4.
Councillor Kelly.
4.
Councillor Lang.
Against.
Councillor Mike Leaves.
4.
Councillor Sam Leaves.
4.
Councillor Loveridge.
For.
Councillor Lowry.
Against.
Councillor MacDonald.
Against.
Councillor Morris.
Against.
Councillor Murphy.
Against.
Councillor Neal.
Against.
Councillor Patrick Nicholson.
For.
Councillor Parker Delahete.
Against.
Councillor Penberthy.
Against.
Councillor Mrs Pengelly.
For.
Councillor Rennie.
Against.
Councillor Riley.
For.
Councillor Singh.
For.
Councillor Pete Smith.
Against.
Councillor Rebecca Smith.
For.
Councillor Stevens.
Against.
Councillor John Taylor.
Against.
Councillor Kate Taylor.
Against.
Councillor Tuffin.
Against.
Councillor Toohey.
Against.
Councillor Vincent.
Against.
Councillor Ms Watkin.
For.
Councillor Wheeler.
Against.
Councillor Wiggins.
For.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Against.
Lord Mayor.
Not voting.
Okay, thank you. That concludes the vote.
The vote is 25 for, 30 against, and 2 not voting or absent. So the vote is not carried.
So the motion having been defeated, it looks as though we will have to wait until the 24th of August before the resumption of garden waste collections here in the city of Plymouth. I hope you found it informative and have a greater insight now into the decision which has been made. Thanks for listening, and bye for now. The theme music in this podcast has been provided by audionautics.com.
The Plympton Podcast.